The fluorescent light above the stove buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the formica countertops. Outside, the wind nudged the brittle fall leaves across the porch like dry whispers. Inside, Jason, oblivious to the storm forming at the front door, was aligning his cars with the solemn intensity only children and engineers possess. He placed a blue Mustang next to a flame-painted Camaro, adjusted their wheels so they all faced east, and nodded to himself. I watched him with a reverence I never fully articulated. It was in these moments, these fragile slices of peace, that I saw what he'd fought through, not just illness, but the shadow of death itself. Chemotherapy had stolen his hair, but not his defiance. He wore his recovery like armor, not apology. And then came the knock. It was the kind of knock that doesn't ask for permission, the kind you hear in documentaries before the door splinters. My jaw clenched before I even registered why. Something about it was off, calculated, too deliberate, like the sound of someone who'd rehearsed dominance in a mirror. The men on the other side didn't wear uniforms, but they exuded the arrogance of those who thought a clipboard made them gods. The taller one, with his rigid posture and passive-aggressive smile, spoke with the indifferent authority of a man used to breaking people with policy, not fists. His partner, chewing gum with lazy menace, scanned my face like he was reading a warrant that didn't exist. That fake badge gleamed in the fading light, but it was the language that struck me harder than the plastic emblem. You can't keep a child here. Jason. That sentence turned the air to lead. Every word after that fell like gravel on glass. Child welfare survey form. Not compliant. Property review. Bureaucratic violence masked as community concern. They weren't here to help. They were here to flex power, false, unauthorized, uninvited power. And my son was their leverage. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I watched their retreating backs as they walked away like they'd issued a parking ticket, not tried to undermine the sanctity of a father's home. Jason's voice, small but clear, snapped the world back into motion. Dad, did I do something wrong? His question shattered me in a way no illness ever had. I dropped to one knee, gathered his tiny hands into mine. No, buddy, you didn't. They did. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I reached for my phone. There are calls you never want to make. Calls that cross invisible lines. This was one of them. Uncle Marcus, I said, voice tight. He didn't respond immediately. Then came a single sentence. Calm. Lethal. Send me the names. Because Marcus Holloway wasn't just family. He was justice. With teeth. They showed up like a fungus, uninvited, thriving on neglect, and always just beneath the surface. The moment they left that first time, I knew something was wrong. Not just with the absurdity of their claim, but with the way they carried themselves. Like men playing dress-up in power they hadn't earned. I sat at my kitchen table that night and began peeling back the layers. There were no bylaws referencing safety officers, no meeting minutes, no votes, no public postings or ratified amendments, just two men operating under the pretense of HOA authority, untraceable by any legal standard. I combed through archived PDFs, cross-referenced old neighborhood bulletins, even tracked down a former board member who'd moved to Arizona. We never approved anything like that, she told me. The board used to be 3 people and a coffee pot. What the hell happened? That question echoed in my mind. 2 days later, it wasn't a question anymore. It was a statement, pinned to my front door with blue painter's tape like some sick trophy. Child storage violation, $2,000. All caps, Helvetica font, official-looking watermark that dissolved on contact with water. The offense? Jason was playing in the front yard, laughing, blowing bubbles. I was on the porch before they finished walking away. "You really want to go to war over bubbles?" The shorter one turned, gum still popping. "Sir, unsupervised minors pose a risk to neighborhood cohesion. This is about safety." "He's 7, I said. He was playing on his lawn. The taller one flared his nostrils. "Non-compliance will escalate this." "To whom?" I demanded. "Who do you report to?" The short one smirked. "You're looking at him." That was the moment, right then. Not the fake citation, not the smug deflections. It was the arrogance. The belief that because they printed their own badges, they had jurisdiction over my child. That was the moment I knew I had to burn it all down. Not just their fantasy cosplay of law enforcement, but the rotting infrastructure that let them fester. I called the board. Cheryl Dobson answered like she'd been waiting. "Mr. Lyman," she said with syrupy condescension, "we believe our officers act with the community's best interest in mind. You're welcome to file a formal concern. Next month's hearing is open to homeowners." "Next month?" My voice dropped half an octave. "You're aware this is illegal, right?" "I'm aware," she replied, "that some people don't like rules." I hung up. Then I called Marcus. "I want them gone," I said, "and I want their whole circus burned to the ground." He didn't ask why. "You'll get it," he said. "Just stay calm, for Jason." Frank Harlan didn't look like someone who used to hunt fugitives across state lines. He had the lean frame of a man who knew how to disappear into a crowd, a calm demeanor that put people at ease, and eyes that never stopped moving. When he stepped onto our street that evening, you could mistake him for a friendly neighbor, the kind who waves while watering a perfectly mowed lawn. But behind the easy smile was a man built for shadows and silence. Marcus didn't send amateurs. He sent precision. By morning, Frank was already mingling with the enemy. He wore a ball cap with a fictional landscaping company stitched across it and carried moving boxes with fake labels, seasonal decor, basement tools, Jason's toys. A subtle bait, enough to be noticed, enough to trigger their arrogance. And trigger it he did. The safety officers, Chuck and Randy, as they introduced themselves, took the hook like it was seasoned meat. Within minutes, they were circling Frank like territorial dogs. He played the role perfectly, just another tired man trying to move into a place he didn't fully understand. That vulnerability, fake though it was, emboldened them. They bragged about enforcing discipline in the neighborhood, about how certain people needed a reminder who runs things, about that cancer kid whose dad got mouthy. Chuck actually used those words, cancer kid. Then came the line that made my stomach twist even just hearing it on playback. "If he keeps whining, we might have to get rid of the problem." A pause. Laughter. "Kid and all." Frank didn't blink. He nodded like he agreed. Every word recorded, every smirk preserved. But back at home, the dread had already metastasized. Around 3:15 p.m., Jason's school called. His teacher, Mrs. Hanley, had intercepted a woman who claimed to be from the HOA Juvenile Oversight Division. She said she was performing a welfare check on Jason, but she had no badge, no district ID, and no reason to be there. She asked to take him outside for just a minute. That was the exact phrase. Just a minute. Mrs. Hanley, thank God, had the instincts of a lioness. I didn't breathe properly for the rest of the day. That night, I dragged a chair to the hallway, leaned it against the wall across from Jason's door, and sat there with a wooden bat across my lap. Not because I was scared. That would have been easier, because I was certain they'd come again, and I wanted to be the last thing they saw. The air inside the clubhouse that night felt stale, too still, like the room had been holding its breath for weeks and only now remembered how to exhale. Fluorescent lights flickered above the glossy faux mahogany table where Cheryl Dobson sat in her usual throne-like chair, flanked by her self-appointed enforcers and a handful of HOA loyalists. She'd dressed for victory, power red blazer, pearls, a smirk that said nothing touches me. The meeting was called under the guise of urgent community security updates, but Cheryl believed it was about consolidating more authority. She didn't know she was about to lose everything. The Supreme Court's Office of Protective Intelligence had long since infiltrated the space, quietly, methodically. Surveillance equipment had been planted, phones triangulated, wireless bugs activated. The U.S. Marshals watched from a concealed SUV across the street, listening, waiting. This wasn't theater. It was tactical choreography, and when Frank Harlan stepped forward, all charm gone, the room tensed like a pressure cooker lid buckling. He didn't yell, he didn't perform, he just pressed play. The recording hissed softly, then bled into crystal clear sound. Chuck and Randy, the HOA safety officers, laughing as they mocked residents. "I love watching them squirm," Randy's voice echoed. "You just show a badge and say, 'compliance,' and they fold." Chuck chimed in, giddy. "That cancer kid? If his dad keeps acting tough, we'll find a reason to take him away. Let's see how strong he is then." There was no room for doubt. Their voices, their words, their hatred, laid bare. You could hear it. The ripple of disbelief, the sudden sharp inhalation from one board member, the slow scrape of someone's chair as they leaned away from Cheryl. Then the door opened. Marcus didn't rush. He didn't need to. He entered with the weight of consequence trailing behind him like a cloak. There was no need to introduce him. His presence said enough. He approached the head of the table with surgical calm, pulled a manila folder from under his arm and placed it in front of Cheryl like it might catch fire. "You impersonated law enforcement," he began, voice low but cutting. "You extorted your neighbors, endangered a child, and conspired to violate federal law. If I were on the bench, I'd step away. Not for bias, but for how much restraint it would take not to sentence you myself." Cheryl blinked, lips parted in slow-motion disbelief. Marcus tapped the folder once. "This isn't a case file. It's an indictment." The door opened again. 2 marshals entered, unceremonious, unfazed. The officers didn't resist, just sat there, stunned, as their wrists were zip-tied with the same casual efficiency they'd once used to terrorize innocent people. And Cheryl? The queen of the cul-de-sac, the self-declared protector of neighborhood integrity? She cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the stunned, sputtering realization that the empire she built on fear had just collapsed in silence. Corruption never announces itself. It seeps, invisible, through cracks in trust. And by the time the investigation truly cracked open, the damage was deeper than anyone could have guessed. Cheryl Dobson hadn't just overstepped her bounds as HOA president. She had engineered an entire regime of exploitation, laundering community funds through shell vendors, off-the-books contractors, and a Cayman-based neighborhood improvement fund that, in reality, paid for first-class flights and a lakeside home she never listed on her disclosures. The forensic audit was damning. Every citation, every inflated fee, every vague compliance charge was logged in detail. The $125 mailbox alignment fee? Fake. The $90 gravel dispersion infraction? Fabricated. Each fine added weight to a private empire she built on the backs of families who thought their silence would buy peace. It hadn't. It bought her another leather recliner and a new set of golf clubs. But the truth didn't stay buried. The class action lawsuit came together in under 24 hours. Word spread like fire. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years began comparing notes, matching dates, letters, bogus inspections. One couple, the Martins, he a retired veteran, she recovering from surgery, had been hit with over $3,000 in fines for unauthorized lawn vegetation. They'd nearly sold their house out of desperation. And then there was the Dawsons. Their golden retriever, Penny, had barked at a passing squirrel one afternoon. The safety officers seized her, claiming she posed a daylight acoustic disruption. Penny was rehomed without notice. The Dawsons never saw her again. Each story was worse than the last. Each one painted Cheryl not as an overzealous administrator, but as a predator cloaked in bureaucratic process. A tyrant in pearls. When the charges came, they came fast. Fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit racketeering, impersonation of law enforcement, and, worst of all, child endangerment. That last charge, leveled for the threats and attempts to intimidate Jason, carried a particular gravity in court. It struck a chord even hardened prosecutors couldn't ignore. The HOA, stripped of its leadership and its charter, collapsed like a gutted theater set. In its place, something honest began to take shape. A community council, open, transparent, neighbor-run, replaced the system that once stalked its own. Meetings were voluntary, records public, leadership voted in without intimidation. And to mark the change, the neighborhood voted unanimously to rename the main street, Marcus Holloway Avenue. Not because Marcus asked for it, but because justice deserved a permanent address. The dedication ceremony was modest. No cameras, no ribbon-cutting circus, just a cluster of folding chairs beneath the slow hush of maples that lined what was once Spruce Hollow Lane. Now it bore a new name, etched into a gleaming bronze sign, planted into freshly turned soil. Marcus Holloway Avenue. The air held the weight of something sacred, not because of spectacle, but because of what had been survived, what had been reclaimed. Jason stood beside Marcus with a solemnity that didn't quite match his age, the kind of quiet pride that only comes from understanding more than a child should ever have to. In his hands he clutched a walnut plaque that read, "For service in defense of the vulnerable." The letters shimmered under the sunlight, their edges catching the morning gold like armor. He turned, peered up at the man beside him, the man who had stood between him and unspoken ruin, and asked in a voice so soft it barely crested the breeze, "Why did you help us?" Marcus didn't hesitate. He didn't rise into rhetoric or dilute his answer with metaphor. He bent his knees, resting on one leg to meet Jason eye to eye, and replied with quiet finality, "Because no one scares my family, and because justice doesn't stop at the Supreme Court steps." Jason nodded like he understood more than he could say. His eyes shone, not with tears, but with something cleaner, peace, the kind that wraps around a child when the monsters outside their window are finally gone. But monsters don't die. They retreat, recoil, and sometimes they whisper from the shadows. Later that week, I opened the mailbox and found a plain white envelope. No stamp, no name. Inside, a single sheet of printer paper. 12 words, typed in all caps, cut like a blade without needing to shout. "You should have let the HOA do its job. We were keeping your kind in check." No signature, no hint of origin. Just bile and cowardice, neatly folded. I didn't show it to Jason, didn't bring it up to Marcus. I didn't rage, I didn't flinch. I filed it away in a folder labeled "For the Record," beneath a lockbox of court documents and hard drives. Because threats that come without names die without noise. They thought fear was a weapon, but fear only works when you forget who's standing behind you. They tried to take my son, but they didn't know. His godfather wrote the system.